Today we're at the Museum of Anthropology at the University of British Columbia. This museum houses a gigantic array of artifacts from cultures around the world. Let's go explore. The Museum of Anthropology at the University of British Columbia, Vancouver houses over 500,000 archaeological objects reflecting arts and cultures of the world and highlighting Indigenous cultures of the Pacific Northwest. The Museum of Anthropology has a large collection of Indigenous carvings. These two poles are interior house poles that would have helped support the enormous beams of the large buildings that used to house several related families. The tradition of carving totem poles dates back several hundred years. This pole that we see before us probably was carved around the 1850s and is over 160 years old. It wasn't uncommon for several hundred people to attend ceremonial feasts and gatherings at the community big house. This item is a large house dish carved out of wood, which would hold large quantities of food to feed the masses. Carved figures like this one would have been used during winter ceremonies inside the big house. The person who had the privilege of speaking on behalf of the hosts would conceal himself behind the figure and project his voice forward as though it was an ancestor calling to the assembled guests. Many Indigenous cultures had a tradition of putting sculpted figures of birds, animals, humans, or other supernatural beings on display. The sculpted animals often represented the ancestral histories and supernatural origins of the house family. This carving is a more recent one. It's the Haida bear carved by Bill Reid, and it's just one of several of Bill Reid's creations that are highlighted at the museum. Bill Reid was a well-known force in the development of modern Indigenous art, bringing the ancestral traditions of Indigenous peoples to a wider public. Bill set out to learn about his mother's Haida culture and then translate it into new forms. Bill worked in many mediums including jewelry, sculpture, painting, and poetry. This is one of Bill's better-known works, Raven and the First Men, which was featured on the Canadian $20 bill. This depicts the story of the raven who was searching the barren lands following the Great Flood. The raven stumbles across a clamshell that's filled with tiny creatures, and he convinces them to come out and play in the shiny new world. Those creatures were the original Haida and the first humans. The sculpture sits on the foundation of a former gun emplacement. Check out our video of the Point Grey Battery if you're interested in finding out more about the history and remains of that site. This other Bill Reid sculpture is a carved and hand-painted figure of the Haida sea monster Wasco, who's known as the Sea Wolf because their form is half wolf and half killer whale. In this sculpture, Wasco has hunted down 3 orcas and is devouring one of them. When we visited the museum, the main gallery was closed for seismic upgrades, and many of the large totems had been taken down or relocated for safety during the construction. But speaking of earthquakes, this is the perfect time to display this earthquake mask of Nanini, who had the power to shake the world. Here's another Indigenous artifact, the Great Raven Mask. These are incredibly rare, and only a few Indigenous families would have the power to display such an artifact. And this is another rare mask which depicts the Thunderbird. This piece was commissioned by the Museum of Anthropology in the early 1980s. Beyond local First Nations, the museum also has an extensive collection of artifacts from around the world. I thought it was interesting to see this brick stamped with cuneiform. which dates back to over 2,000 years BC. This would have been created at the time of the last Sumerian dynasty in ancient Mesopotamia. This shield comes from the Osmot, who live in a large swampy area in southwestern Papua New Guinea. Shields like this were often carved prior to a headhunting reprisal raid, and they believed that the ancestor's spirit is present in the shield, making the owner fierce and invincible. This armor comes from Japanese samurai, which existed between the 12th and 19th centuries. The samurai were experts in archery, swordsmanship, and horseback riding, and practiced Zen Buddhism, which helped give the samurai mental strength. Over here are sani masks, which are used in demon or devil dancing as part of exorcism rituals. It was thought that the demons caused the illness, but could also heal it with the help of Buddha once a proper tribute was paid. And over here is an orator sculpture, which is also from Papua New Guinea. It was used to protect spirits who might be presiding over ceremonies or during the settlement of clan disputes. During a debate, the orator would call on the spirit to support his speech, and these arguments could last for several days. Outside on the museum grounds, you can see the recreation of a 19th century Haida village. This includes a large Haida house as well as a mortuary house, and a number of memorial and mortuary poles which date back to 1951. Carved by the likes of Jim Hart, Chief Walter Harris, and Mungo Martin. And for now, it's time to exit through the gift shop, but if you enjoyed this video, we're heading off on another adventure, so come and join us.